Okay, so Mike, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Well, I think as a young boy. I actually don't live too far from some of the major airports in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a young boy actually taking a field trip over to Kennedy Airport, which at the time was called Idlewild Airport, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this was long before TSA and security restrictions. So we were able to actually roll up in a school bus right up to, I think it was a 727 maybe,
mm-hmm.
and walk right on the aircraft and meet the crew, meet the pilots. They talked about flying. And so I think I got interested from that point,
mm-hmm.
and got the bug then as a pretty young guy.
Yeah. So what year did you join the U.S. Navy?
Well, I was selected to attend the Naval Academy in 1973, graduated in 1977, and then I was selected for flight training while I was a senior at the Naval Academy, and so began flight training the summer after I graduated in 1977. Mm-hmm. And I had the opportunity to learn to fly in a T-28 Trojan, which some people that know that aircraft are pretty surprised to know that I learned in that aircraft. Mm-hmm. Initially, the Navy used it as an intermediate trainer, and they would have a primary training in a T-34 Bravo at the time, mm-hmm. and the pipeline was typically T-34 Bravo, then T-28. Mm-hmm. But there was a transition period in which I got caught between T-34 Bravo and Charlie, so they pushed us right into the T-28, which was great fun. 1,400 horsepower, 8,000-pound aircraft. As I tell people, I didn't know any better, so I just got it in and flew it. And it was a bit to handle, but it was a lot of fun to learn how to fly in a T-28. And then selected helicopters. I really had a great affinity for helicopters. While I was a student at the Naval Academy, we would travel to different locations around the United States to see what we might want to do. And I got a familiarization flight in a helicopter, really liked it. And then I really liked the idea of rescue, the idea of being part of the life-saving mission. So mm-hmm. that was the attraction to helicopters. So learned in a TH-57, a Jet Ranger, TH-1, a Iroquois or Huey, the ubiquitous Huey, to learn more advanced flying, basic instruments, radio instruments. Mm-hmm. Then after that, was selected to report to Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron 6, which was out in San Diego, to begin my fleet tour. Mm-hmm. I think roughly it took about a year for me to get through. I finished the T-28 fixed wing portion and then went into the rotary wing. So I'm thinking roughly about a year. I actually, while I was in the fixed wing portion, I actually injured my ankle playing basketball, so I was down for a while.
Oh, no.
So it took me a little bit longer than most helicopter pilots, probably mm-hmm. total about 18 months to get through.
And I'm very interested. How was it coming from fixed wing aircraft to training on rotary wing aircraft? That must have been quite difficult.
Yeah, it's like anything else. It's a skill you have to acquire. Great training down in Pensacola over at Whiting Field for helicopter pilots. So mm-hmm. I actually appreciated the fact that I got to fly fixed wing first, get an appreciation of flying single engine airplanes, and then transitioning over to helicopters. And yeah, from the beginning, I really loved helicopters. Challenging to learn a couple of the things like hovering and mm-hmm. learning the skills essential for helicopter flying. But yeah, just really enjoyed it from the start.
So can you tell us about the first frontline aircraft you went to and what squadron you were based with?
Well, so that would have been after helicopter flight school. I reported out to San Diego and learned to fly a helicopter called the SH-60 Sea King. And that was a carrier-based aircraft that was used for anti-submarine warfare to defend the carrier and the battle group against a submarine threat. And then, of course, rescue for the air wing. So we would provide a rescue capability. We would be the first off the ship prior to the launch of all the fixed-wing aircraft and the last to recover. And we would do anti-submarine warfare tasks, but also be right alongside the ship for launch and recovery in case one of our fixed-wing brethren ran into some problems mm-hmm.
to
get out of the aircraft. Or if they were on a training sortie near the ship, of course, we would be available to go rescue them. So the frontline first task was anti-submarine warfare and rescue.
So how long did you spend with the squadron and on the type? And could you tell us where you went after this?
That's a typical squadron tour. was about 2.5 years. So I arrived at the squadron. Before you go on the long deployment, you do what's called a workup period. So you deploy on the ship, USS Constellation, with the rest of the air wing to get ready to train to go. And then we would deploy. We actually deployed in 1980 over to the Persian Gulf. We didn't enter it, but in the Indian Ocean during the Iranian hostage crisis. So we were stuck out there at sea for quite a number of days while that went on, and so a lot of sea time. It was originally scheduled to be a 6-month deployment. I think it ended up being about eight or 9 months. So pretty tough on the families and the men on the ship. In those days, there were not yet women introduced into the fleet in large fashion, so it was an all-male evolution out there. And so that was an interesting time. Then after the assignments at helicopter into Submarine Squadron 6, I got a billet at the Naval Air Systems Command in Washington, D.C., and I worked in a program office for the LAMPS, or LAMPS, Light Airborne Multipurpose Aircraft, and the Navy was introducing the H-60 into the fleet at that time, the SH-60B. So I had the opportunity to work in Washington, D.C., which was good. I got some program management credentials. I worked in the program office, had some interaction with congressional staffers. We were advocates for the program, briefing the program, hoping to win budget against many other programs, of course, in the Navy and the military. But it was very rewarding. And I actually got the opportunity to go up to Sikorsky aircraft periodically, probably about once a quarter, to fly the H-60s and some of the Army Black Hawks that were coming off the line. There was a program office, the Naval Plant Representative Office up in Stratford, and I was permitted to go up there and keep current. So it was really a lot of fun flying these aircraft right off the line, brand new, like flying or getting into a new car. That new car smell. It was really great to get a chance to fly these aircraft when they were just pristine right out of the factory. So that was great fun.
How different was it coming from the Sea King to this brand new aircraft? And could you tell us a bit about the training on the aircraft?
Yeah, the H-60 is quite a bit different. Faster, I'll say sleeker, less of a payload, but a great aircraft, very pilot-friendly, a great pleasure to fly. The anti-submarine warfare version was not dissimilar from what the capabilities of the Sea King were, although more modern equipment, a better sonar, better sonobuoys. And so I think it was a little sleeker, a little slicker to fly, more sports car-ish than the H-3. But it was great to have the opportunity to fly it in the Navy for that short period of time.
Mm-hmm. So it was actually a multi-role helicopter. It wasn't designed for one specific task. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, the H-60 has a number of different versions. The Navy version, SH-60B, F. The Air Force adopted the aircraft as the Combat Search and Rescue platform, which I eventually got to fly, HH-60G or HH-60H. And then it's absolutely ubiquitous in the U.S. Army. The Army has lots and lots of fundamental Black Hawks, UH-60s, A through I think maybe L or Q. I mean, they've got just sort of the replacement for the Huey. The Huey was such a widely used, widely known aircraft, and there was a competition in the late 70s to sort of replace that utility aircraft. Yeah. And Sikorsky and the H-60 won that competition.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on to when you moved to the US Air Force, could you tell us about the cockpit of the H-60 at this time? Was it up to date and modern like we would expect helicopters now with glass cockpit, or was it still analog and dials?
Yeah, not yet. There was some glass, but these earlier versions were very much the old steam gauge style. There were other parts of the cockpit which had a multifunction display on the pedestal between the pilots where you could enter data, etc., but not a lot of the glass technology where you see all of the six-pack, if you will, integrated onto one glass area. So it was still pretty more analog than digital back in the early days.
Yeah. So how long did you spend with the U.S. Navy on the H-60, and how many hours did you get before you joined the U.S. Air Force?
Well, the H-60 flying that I did was not a great many hours because I was flying up with the Nav Pro with acceptance test pilots. So I was more in a co-pilot role, just building some hours. So I decided after that tour, it would have been time in the Navy to go back to the fleet, maybe go back to the ship. I had started my family, and my wife and I decided that we would leave the Navy, but I wanted to stay flying in the Naval Reserve initially. And I came back to Long Island, New York, where we're from, and I discovered a unit called the 106 Rescue Wing right on the eastern end of Long Island, which I knew very little about until I actually discovered it when we were at Sikorsky flying some approaches one day. We were over at that Suffolk County Airport, and I saw at the time they had H-3 helicopters. So they were flying what they called the Jolly Green Giant, which was the primary combat SAR helicopter during Vietnam. And so when I left active duty, the Naval Reserve options were such that I would have had to commute a substantial way, Willow Grove in Pennsylvania, or at the time South Weymouth in Boston. And this unit was really right down the street, so to speak. It was very, very close to where I lived. And they were interested in me because I had already trained in an H-3, so it wouldn't be necessary for me to go away for schooling for a long time. So I got the opportunity to transition from the SH-3 hotel to the HH-3H in the U.S. Air Force, which was great fun. Ironically, as I tell people, the HH-3 in the Air Force had a boat hull, so you could land it on the water, and it would do very, very well in a modest sea state. Of course, if the sea state got too great, it could tip. But the Navy version did not have such a capability.
How ironic.
I thought it was interesting that I could actually land the HH-3 Air Force version in a lake, which we used to do in practice, but not so in the SH-3 hotel. If that was in the water from the carrier, it would turn upside down pretty quickly because of the weight of the rotor head. So it was surprising that, and ironic, as I said, that the Air Force version could float. But
yeah, of course.
So the big difference between the two was really the air refueling capability of the HH-3. So that was something I had never done before, and I had some great instructors out at the 106 that taught me how to do that safely. But that was really one of the things that made the helicopter and our mission, or our 106 Rescue Wing, so valuable, was the ability to fly the aircraft for great distances with a C-130 in tow or in formation with us, where they could just keep providing fuel to us. So it really was a great capability that we had.
Yeah, and before we move on, we've talked. You've mentioned a few things there, like the SH, double H. Can you tell our viewers what these stand for?
Yeah, S is particularly related to, I think it's or shipboard ops, or S is probably anti-submarine operations. H, if I'm not mistaken, is usually related to rescue. So U is utility. I'm not as probably informed as I was years ago. MH, multi-mission. So those are just designations associated with a particular aircraft. Yeah, so I transitioned from the U.S. Navy to the U.S. Air Force. Got a commission. I was a 03 in the Navy. I became an 03 or a captain in the Air Force. And because I had the H-3 experience in the Navy, they were able to do what's called in-unit train me. So they have a cadre of instructor pilots that taught me about the differences with the HH-3. So the big difference, of course, was air refueling, and then maybe more remote landings, more of a combat search and rescue mission. In the Navy, there was not emphasis on that in our squadron at the time, where combat SAR was not really our forte in the helicopter squadron back on the carrier back then. I think that's changed now. They do have a great combat SAR capability on the carrier now. But our land-based squadron was responsible and would deploy as a combat search and rescue asset to protect during an air campaign. So the fundamental idea was if a fighter or some other friendly coalition aircraft was shot down, it was our responsibility, our job to go in and recover them.
What kind of size crew would the H-60 carry?
Yeah, our basic crew was a pilot, an aircraft commander, a co-pilot, a flight engineer, and a gunner. So there was a flight engineer that would do all of our checklists and do all of our systems. Very, very important part of the team. The gunner was also very important. would operate M60 miniguns or 50 cal guns in the back. And then maybe most importantly, as they would tell me, the pararescue jumpers, or our PJs, were a really vital, important part of the package. Very highly trained, very motivated special forces types that were very well trained to work in really any environment. We used to say from the highest mountains to the deepest ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Their training pipeline is a couple of years with very high attrition. So these guys are the ones you want coming for you if you're in trouble, whether you're in a combat situation or in a civil SAR situation. If they're coming, you should feel good because they are very well trained, very well capable of life-saving in the most austere conditions.
Yeah. And I think one of the main points for this interview is you involved in, obviously, the tragic event of Hurricane Katrina. Could you tell us about your involvement and your story with this mission, this rescue mission?
Yes, it was quite surprising that we would be tasked to fly to New Orleans to help recover the city underwater. At the time, we were really packed up, ready to go to a deployment to Afghanistan. And so one of the things that typically happens right before we go on a deployment is that the crew members, the deploying members, get an opportunity to take some time off, to take some leave right before they go. So if we're deploying in a month, for example, they'll take some time with their families and be able to spend some time getting their affairs together, etc. So we sort of wind down the training, and then we have those crews slated to go. So Katrina, I think it was a Sunday, maybe when it went landfall in New Orleans, and we were watching it, not thinking we would be tasked. And of course, the big surprise was the failure of these levees, which flooded the city and filled the city. And I didn't know, probably most people didn't know, that much of the city is described as a bowl. It's below sea level.
Wow. Okay.
And the levees around the city are what protects it from flooding. So there's a very large body of water called Lake Pontchartrain to the north, and of course the Mississippi River to the south. And when this levee failure in Lake Pontchartrain happened, the water just started flowing in. I think that was on Monday night. So I do remember a headline from the Times-Picayune, which is the main newspaper down there in New Orleans. I think the headline read, "Dodged a bullet," meaning that a lot of the wind damage and a lot of the rain damage didn't occur, but of course that motion and those winds did weaken the levees to the point where they eventually gave way and flooded the city. So water's pouring in probably starting Monday night, all day Tuesday. Wednesday, I got a call from my contact at the Air Force Special Operations Command who said, "You've got to send everything you can down to New Orleans." And I explained, of course, and he knew we were getting ready to go on the deployment. And he said, "Well, just send what you can." So we had a couple of helicopters that were back at base. They weren't scheduled for the deployment. And for me, at the time, I was the wing commander. So normally I would not go on a mission like this. As you get more senior, you do less flying, which is disappointing sometimes. You have to do your admin work and your leadership. But not to say it's not a great job, but you do sometimes get less flying. But in this case, all the good pilots were slated to go to Afghanistan, so they had to scrape the bottom of the barrel and get me to go. So I actually had the opportunity to go in one of the aircraft, and we sent two down there and flew down. I guess it was all day Thursday. So we got down there on Thursday evening, and we had two aircraft. So one aircraft worked, I'll say, a night shift, and the aircraft I was in worked a day shift. But we actually headquartered out of Jackson, Mississippi, because there was no power, there was no real ability logistically to support rescue forces. So we actually were in Jackson, about a mile north of New Orleans, with a bunch of other Air Force helicopters. I think there were 20 others. So there are units from around the country. They're active duty CSAR units and then Guard and Reserve CSAR units. And a bunch of us all met up there in Jackson. And then we headed down to New Orleans on the first couple of days. There wasn't a lot of organization because there was a hurry to get people out of their homes. So if you ever get a chance to see some of the pictures, you'll note that the water's all the way up to the rooftops. Yeah. So people were literally on their roofs. And so they were not sure what was happening. They were hoping maybe the flooding would subside, but because of the bowl effect of the city of New Orleans, it just stayed flooded for days and days. So our mission was really to go downtown and just start to look for people, that were on their rooftops, or if they were in their homes, somehow signaling to us to go pick them up. So it was pretty shocking, as I say, flying from Jackson, which was north. We fly across the lake, and then just to look at the city of New Orleans completely underwater everywhere you looked. It was just incredible.
So you're not expecting the severity of the situation before you flew over there?
No. But once a big surprise, and I would tell people, you had television pictures or still pictures, but nothing was like being in the aircraft and sort of turning your head 360, and everywhere you looked, there was just water, just at different levels. At some places, very, very deep, right up to the rooftops, and other places less so. But the people that needed the most help were those that were literally on their roofs looking for help. So that's the first day we were actually just flying along, picking people up off their roofs. And we would typically send our pararescue jumpers down the rescue hoist onto the roof to explain to the survivors how we were going to get them into the aircraft. And so naturally we make a lot of noise. They were frightened. This was going to be their first helicopter ride. But I can't say enough about our PJs, just the best, great diplomats, very personable, keeping them calm, taking children in their arms up into the aircraft, and just doing a great job. And one of them, early on, two great guys, Rocco Pergola, Jeff Smith, very, very smart guys. They said, "Hey, sir, we better, after we take people off the roof, let's mark the roof to let people know that we've been here," because the rescue wasn't very organized. So they had spray paint, and they would make a note on the roof, and they would write rescue, and they write our unit number, and they would say, rescue 2 or rescue 3. So other rescuers that would come later would waste time trying to see if anybody was in the house. So very, very talented, quick thinking by them. And there were a number of helicopters, not only the military helicopters, but a lot of civilian helicopters down there, all working on one frequency, trying to not step on each other on the frequency, and really try to coordinate the effort. But all in all, it was really magnificent to see it. Eventually, the Air Force leadership up in Jackson, we were able to grid out sectors to do it more efficiently, to make sure we could get everybody out that needed to get out. But by that day, I mean, we were making pickups on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. People were out of food, out of water. A couple of people had some medical conditions, some medical issues. So we had a photo of a lift of an elderly woman who our pararescueman got her into a stretcher, and we hoisted her up in the stretcher into the helicopter, and then got her over to a triage area that they had set up at the Louis Armstrong Airport, their main airport in New Orleans. Basically a hospital where they were able to get some generators. They would triage patients there. There were a bunch of doctors and medical staff there that were addressing the injuries to the survivors. Yeah, there was the triage area at the hospital for those that we would make a determination when we brought people up into the helicopter. If they weren't injured, if they were in pretty good shape, they were ambulatory, they could move on by themselves. We would take them to another place, which was identified as, it was called the Cloverleaf, which was basically the transition between Interstate 10 and one of the main roads into New Orleans. So there were a bunch, I'll never forget, a line of buses, must have been 50 or 100 of buses lined up. Wow. So people would come in with their whatever belongings they had, and the buses would just take them away from the city. I think they went to different places around the country, Houston, and all over the United States. So it was it really demanded a lot of our skill sets. From combat search and rescue, we had a lot of developed good skill sets, but nothing like working over this urban environment with power lines and all other sorts of things. One of the things we learned early on is we couldn't hover too closely over a roof, because a lot of times we would just peel the roofing material off the roof, and of course it would sort of fly up, and you didn't want to strike a rotor with a piece of shingle or something, so we had to learn that. And in one case, very memorable case, there was a young man, I'm guessing probably in his 30s, on top of his roof, waving a white shirt, and he had written on his roof that his family was inside the house, but he couldn't get them up on the roof. So this was a very physical guy. Obviously, he was able to climb out a window, climb up onto the roof. So we put the pararescuemen down onto the roof, and they communicated with him. And it turned out that most of his family were in the house, but he couldn't get them up. So the pararescueman had a pickaxe and a chainsaw that they brought back got it down from the helicopter. They actually cut a hole in the top of the roof.
Wow.
Into the hot attic, into a dark attic, and then they cut a hole in the ceiling down into the room where the survivors were. So you can imagine these people looking up and seeing a hole being cut into their roof and some U.S. forces coming through.
Wow.
And they were able to get everybody out. I think there were 8 survivors in there, including a baby. And so we sort of just hoisted them up through this hole and got them all to safety. So it was really another demonstration of how skilled, how smart these pararescuemen were, and the rest of the team, the flight engineer, the gunner, all working together to make sure they were safely on board. One of the differences between the H-3 and the H-60 was the payload was much smaller, so we would jam as many as we could in there safely to take them to the triage area or to the cloverleaf for further disposition. But it was quite a stunning memory. I still have it sort of burned in my brain of just everywhere to see. I visited New Orleans over the years, and I had the opportunity to visit. Of course, it's a great city, totally underwater, just amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine immensely rewarding as well, to just directly help people who are that much in need.
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, one of the things that attracted me to helicopter flying was that opportunity. I think one of the Sikorsky quotes was he was so pleased that his invention would be used for that mission. So very, very important. Really couldn't have done it without all of these helicopters, not just ours. Mm-hmm. We had another helicopter from our unit as well, staffed by some great teammates. So it was all good.
So to go into a bit nitty gritty about the kind of operations, how would you and the crews go about planning a certain rescue? Is it literally get in and have a look, or did you have to coordinate with other helicopters? Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, early on, as I said, it was sort of the instructions were go downtown. It was a common frequency that we were working, that we try to check in. But at that point, there wasn't anybody sort of quarterbacking it. So we initially went to the parts of the city that we sort of eyeballed and looked where the water was the deepest. So that's how we did it in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Then eventually, probably day 2 or day 2.5, there was good mission management from back in Jackson, where we established a grid, and then each of the military helicopters was assigned to working the grid. So we weren't sure of where survivors may be. You'd fly over a neighborhood or fly over a house and try to make a determination if you thought there were survivors in there. So that's how we did it. Mm-hmm. Normally on a rescue mission, and I never had the opportunity to do a combat mission, but a fair amount of civil search and rescue missions where we would get tasked by the Coast Guard or some other agency to go look. So we would come in and mission plan to the best of our ability. One of the things that I always say about rescue work is that frequently the information that you get initially changes. So you might get a report of a boat missing, a Boston whaler with 2 occupants and a dog, and when you take off and start flying, the ops center calls you and say, well, it's not 2 people, it's 1 person and a dog, and it's not a Boston whaler, it's a cabin cruiser, right? That kind of thing. And typically you'd be tasked in some challenging weather. So I think one of the important qualities of good crew members, aircraft commanders, co-pilots, all the crew members, is really risk management and mission management. And it's up to that aircraft commander to perhaps make a tough call, because as the weather deteriorates or as the conditions can deteriorate or as things change, you may have to make a tough call. We always want to go to save that survivor. We always want to make sure that if they're in extremis, we want to get there and save their lives. Sometimes when a mission would go down, maybe the people calling it in would not realize that maybe they could wait to the next day, for example. Very weary of night missions because of the risk associated with that. So we would get to the point where we would question the tasking agency to say, okay, tell us exactly what's going on. We frequently try to get a flight surgeon involved in the loop so they could talk to other medical professionals to say, no kidding, this person has to come off right now at night. And if we got that tasking, we would go. But mission management, risk management, because of the variables, because of the constant changes that were typical of these missions, made it pretty challenging.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the H-60 was the right aircraft for this job?
Yeah, I think it was. It was initially, from the combat search and rescue perspective, the specification, I would say, was really to pick up 2 fighter pilots or 2 pilots, any type pilot, if you will. But the common thinking would be in an air campaign, if a fighter was shot down, then our crew would go in to get it. So you really only needed space for 2.
Yeah.
Now, sort of in Katrina or in maybe other cases where you had a large number to bring back, the space was limited, so it was tighter. Mm-hmm. But the Air Force is continuing with the commitment to the H-60. So I do think the H-60 is a good choice. It was a good, very reliable aircraft. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we also did at the 106 was provide space shuttle contingency rescue or contingency.
Right.
So the space shuttle had an issue, and astronauts could at some point, actually during the ascent, there were different windows in which they would be able to bail out, believe it or not.
Right. Wow.
None of the ones I talked to really thought very highly of the fact they would have to do that. But we would practice that. But one of the things, of course, was we could really only take one astronaut in an aircraft because of their suit, and then because of the need to probably do some important medical attention immediately. So when we would do these missions, we'd have plenty of helicopters available to address the need to perhaps take an astronaut up after a bailout of the space shuttle.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about the rescues, but how were the crews and yourself dealing with the Katrina situation?
I think physically we had to be careful because it was very, very warm down there. Probably the air temperature was in the 90s, and then with the humidity, the real field temperatures were probably over 100. So we really needed to be careful. Of course, the word of the day was hydrate, drink a lot of water, make sure we had plenty of water. And of course, our survivors, the folks we were going to go attend to, needed water. So water was a big part of the equation. But I think for us, it was just great motivation. I think mentally we thought, wow, this is really, folks are in a bad spot here, and we have the opportunity to help as best we can. So I think it was for me and for my teammates there, I think it was a very, very life-changing,
I can imagine,
self-satisfying, great sense of satisfaction. And in the 106, I've been gone for a number of years, but they were also fully engaged in Houston recently, almost the same type of mission with very widespread damage after Hurricane Harvey, Puerto Rico. So I think the reputation of the unit to do some pretty spectacular rescue work is well known now, and they'll get tasked to go. But you always have to measure the operations tempo and fatigue of the wing, and particularly the families. Wing members go off on a deployment, or if they're even on a Katrina, the families are left wondering, hoping things are going well.
I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it, but did you have any memorable rescues or things that just burnt in your brain that you'll never forget?
Yeah, I've done a couple of rescues, I'll say civil search and rescues, and on Long Island here, we're surrounded by water, so if it was a long-range rescue, the Coast Guard would give us a shout and say, hey, can you get out there? And I think one of my early ones was a rescue of a foreign national that had a burst appendix, and they were in a very bad medical state. So the Coast Guard actually had gone out to the vessel. They had a fair-sized Coast Guard vessel, maybe a 60-footer, 75-footer, go out and pick this person off the ship and start to get them toward New York to get medical attention. And en route, they said, this patient probably is not going to make it. Wow. If we continue to try to get in on the vessel, can you send a helicopter out? So we said, of course. We went out. We didn't have a tanker available. And it was while we were on a training mission, so we sort of diverted out there, and we really had to be careful with fuel calculations because we had a range and bearing to where the Coast Guard vessel was going to be, but we were using very old technology. This is before GPS, so we were using what's called TACAN, Tactical Air Navigation, a range and bearing from a NavAid, so we're trying to figure out about where this ship would be. And so we got out to the scene. Of course, it took us longer to get out there than we thought. We had some winds that were not favorable, and night had fallen. So it was, well, I'll say dusk. It wasn't dark night, but it was now nighttime, and as it was getting darker, we really wanted to get the survivor off, of course, and get the pararescuemen back on. So once again, these guys did a great job. We got them down on the vessel. They were able to get the patient up into the aircraft, and then we started heading back to our base. And the fuel was tight. It was very, very, I'll say, touch and go. And so it was very, very comforting to see the lights of Long Island as we were coming back, and got them to over to one of our hospital centers here, Stony Brook Hospital. We got the patient, and a great save, which perhaps might have been a lost life if we hadn't been able to get out there. So when we got back, just those few low level lights came on, so it was tough. But back to this idea of the challenge of rescue. You get information, and sometimes it might not be as accurate as you'd like. A lot of things change. The ship may be farther away. There might be a different configuration. The patient may be in worse shape. So those things also always have to be considered. So I'll say that was a non-Katrina one. Mm-hmm. But the Katrina ones, of course, were really rewarding, particularly that family that I described earlier. And I also remember we were very busy. I remember triaging, or the pararescuemen would triage patients in the back, and we would bring them to the airport, as I said, Louis Armstrong Airport, New Orleans, and we would sort of roll up. We'd taxi up. We'd taxi the aircraft, of course. And I remember I was sitting very concentrating in another task, and I felt a tug on my flight suit, and this woman who probably, I'm thinking in her 80s, in a nightgown, just mouthed the words, "Thank you." And I thought, oh, gee, in the heat of things, it was just very touching that she took the time to do it. She just wanted to thank us.
A simple 2 words, yeah.
Yeah, and of course the guys in the back, she was very thankful too. And then actually when she came out of the aircraft, she also insisted pararescue reported to the window, and she sort of knocked on the window again. She waved goodbye.
Brilliant.
So, lovely elder woman. And so, yeah, those sorts of things were very memorable.
So I can imagine you probably do have a strong bond with the city.
Yes. New York, of course. Long Island, where I live, is about 45 miles east of New York City. I grew up here, and of course, the big other momentous event for it was 9/11. Our unit as the crow flies, is only about 60 miles away from Manhattan, and so I was actually not full-time in the Air National Guard. I was a part-timer, as are many National Guardsmen are, and I was at work not far from where I am right now, and I was working for a private company, and one of the secretaries came in, turned on the television, said an aircraft hit the World Trade Center, and I think like most of us thought, okay, King Air or Light Twin or some other aircraft, but because the day was so beautiful, it was so mystifying as to why that mistake could have occurred. So we were watching the coverage, and then of course the second aircraft struck the tower. So I told my boss, I'm going to get on the phone, call the rescue wing, and I just couldn't get through. I mean, the line was busy, and we just couldn't get through. I said, I got to go. So I went out to the wing. Right when I got there, we're getting aircraft ready to go, ready to deploy as required. And just as we was getting ready to do that, the first tower fell, and then the second tower fell. So we had not been tasked yet by the Air National Guard headquarters in New York, but we did get a couple of helicopters downtown after the towers fell with our pararescue, and they joined in the brigade of those looking for the lost. So we had a bunch of pararescuemen down there looking for survivors. And I think I tell people one of the things that I remember was that we were out at the unit getting ready to go, and we didn't know where, but we did expect, I personally expected another attack. Of course, there was another one in Washington at the Pentagon, but I figured, I didn't know the word Al-Qaeda. I didn't know who this enemy was, but I thought if they could do what they did to those towers, that they're some people to be reckoned with. So we were very fearful I thought of the Statue of Liberty. I thought of Wall Street. We just thought there was going to be a wave of these attacks. Very, very concerned about that, but very, very ready. So we talked about how we would address that, what we do, and unfortunately they didn't come as we thought. So our pararescuemen were down at the World Trade Center for quite a couple of days, assisting. Not many survivors. I think, if I remember correctly, they actually assisted in lifting. She may have been the last survivor covered under the rubble there, and so they were able to help be part of the human chain that carried her in a litter to safety. But then, shortly thereafter, we were already scheduled for a deployment to Operation Northern Watch, and of course, the families were very, very concerned, and naturally so. And so that deployment happened, and then we were getting ready to go for full engagement in this global war on terrorism right after 2001. So I actually was selected to be the commander that year, and I can't say enough about the men and women and their families of the 106, just magnificent. Yeah. And we were very, very heavily tasked, and a lot of the airmen were part-timers, and some of them owned their own businesses. And they made huge sacrifices economically, as well as physically, as well as the potential for harm in a combat zone and the risk associated with combat search and rescue flying. So yes, very much connected to New York, very much a New York Air National Guard unit. Of course, love the city. Nice to see the recovery now when we go down there. At Farmingdale now, I actually fly a flight with our seniors, and we actually fly into New York City. And great to see the Freedom Tower now replacing the World Trade Center. And so the recovery is complete. But 106 and the rest of the U.S. forces and friendly forces, coalition forces around the world are busy, paying attention to the continuing threat of terrorism, unfortunately.
And you mentioned a few operations there, but you've managed to participate in a lot. Can you name a few that you've been involved with?
Well, after the first Gulf War, we were actually in a transition from the H-3 to the H-60. So in 1991, when that occurred, we did not deploy as part of that first wave or that first action in Gulf War I. But subsequent to that, the UN imposed sanctions establishing no-fly zones in the northern part and southern part of Iraq. So our unit was regularly scheduled to be part of the Air Force or the U.S. Forces package that would go, and we would either deploy to Kuwait to work Southern Watch or up to Incirlik, Turkey, or other places in Turkey to operate and cover Northern Watch. And we'd basically sit alert. There would be periods where U.S. and coalition British, French fighters were in what they would call the box, the no-fly zone over northern Iraq or southern Iraq. And we would stand by, and if anyone got in trouble or shot down or was in harm's way in Iraq or elsewhere, we were ready to go. So unfortunately, never had a shoot down, never had an action that required us to do that. But it was very interesting and rewarding to be part of Northern Watch and Southern Watch. And then ironically, of course, in 2003, the war with Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, and we actually were in Iraq. So for years we were sort of bracketing it to the north and south, and then suddenly we were fully engaged and in country as part of the CSAR effort and the other U.S. Air Force efforts after the 2003 invasion.
Yeah, how long did you spend on your military career flying, and can you sum it up for us?
Sure, yeah. Well, I about 8.5 years on active duty with the Navy, and loved my time in the U.S. Navy as a naval aviator, and then got the opportunity to transition to the Air Force, which was also fun. So an opportunity to see flying from a little different perspective and enjoy being an Air Force aviator. So for 8.5 years on active duty for the Navy, and then 25 years with the Air National Guard. So really was an exciting time in my life. I really enjoyed it. And of course, my family, I can't say enough about their willingness to let me do that, to go off to Northern Watch or Southern Watch. Or my last job, I was the commander at Sather Air Base in Iraq. I don't think they were necessarily happy with me doing that. It was Christmas and New Year's and all those holidays, but I had the opportunity really to have a Air Force family over there in Iraq. So we did the best we could to mitigate the sadness associated with being away from our families. But but it was good. So 25 years in the Air National Guard and 8 in the Navy, so about 33 years total. And a lot of that 33 was part-time, Mike. After 9/11, I was full-time in the Guard, 9/11 through 2009, but a big bulk of my time as in the 106 was as what we call a traditional guardsman. So I had a job at a company called Telephonics Corporation, but then I would fly once a week to stay proficient and then be available to deploy as required.
So, do you have any hobbies?
I guess I'll put golf as my maybe my number one hobby. I'm not playing as much as I'd like, and I'm not a good golfer. High handicapper, but enjoy the game, love the game, and really it's more about the foursome that I'm with and the friendships and razzing each other and just having a good time out on a beautiful day, a good walk spoiled, so to speak.
So what's the favorite aircraft you've ever flown?
Okay. I really like those H3s because they weren't as fast as the H-60s, but particularly the HH-3, the Jolly Green. It was really a lot of fun landing on that. We used to go up to Lake Champlain because it was fresh water, so we wouldn't get too much salt water, which would be more corrosive. But I really enjoyed flying that HH-3. As I said, maybe the ultimate recreational vehicle. You could fly it, you could land it on the lake. So we would land it on the lake, shut the rotors off, and typically up to Lake Plattsburgh, this would be in the summer. A whole bunch of boaters would come and figure out what the heck is this?
Yeah.
And we put our feet in the water and really enjoy that. So that HH-3 was fun. But I really loved them all. I loved flying off the carrier on the H-3 and the H-60. Like I said, a sports car, very, very quick. And air refueling was satisfying. Tough at times, but when you could successfully air refuel, really a lot of fun. So I like flying the H-60 for that reason. And then, of course, the C-130 was great fun as well.
Brilliant. So is there an aircraft you wish you could have flown in your career?
You know, I had my eye on that V-22, the Osprey.
Yeah.
And over the years, I thought perhaps it would be introduced into the inventory before I left. But I think I'd love to learn how to fly that and try flying that. I think, of course, they had some challenges early on, but I think now it's a pretty safe and reliable aircraft. So, yeah, I think if I had a wish list, I'd put the Osprey, the V-22, right at the top of the list.
So, can you tell us what you're currently up to, and do you still fly today?
Yeah, well, I've got a great opportunity at Farmingdale State College here in New York, and really enjoying being the Aviation Center director. We have a professional pilot program, 22 aircraft, about 100 students, and we're teaching them or preparing them to be professional pilots, military, airline, corporate. So we have a great base of opportunity for our students, and it's a great joy for me to fly with them. I had never flown with an iPad before. I never really had the advantage of all this technology, so I really learn a lot from my students, and I get to fly with them. I do a course called the Professional Pilot Capstone Course. So we actually fly our twin-engine Seminole into New York City so we can practice good crew resource management in that very busy radio environment, a lot of chatter on the radio, so we have to do great crew coordination, looking out for other traffic, and so I think the students enjoy it, and I certainly enjoy it. So yeah, it's been a great sort of back end of my life working at Farmingdale. Like I say, great college, great place to be. I have a great team here, great chief flight instructor, director of maintenance, safety officer, admin, dispatch. All our flight instructors outstanding, all our maintenance technicians outstanding, and our students are outstanding. Yeah. It's fun, you know. They move at different levels. Some of them just pick it up right away. Others we have to spend a little bit more time with. But we typically take our best students and hire them to be our flight instructors. So it's great to see the further development of our students as flight instructors. And I'd say to them, you're the most important leader in the building as a flight instructor, because what you do, what you say, how you behave, how you fly, how you prepare is how they will. So it's fun to be able to share that, to make sure that they're doing things on time, correctly, with integrity. And so it's been a great joy for me to continue to fly and to be in this aviation business.
Brilliant. And just in case there's any viewers watching this in the area, can we find this college online, or do you have a social media a page anywhere?
We do. Well, it's Farmingdale State College, farmingdale.edu. So on the website, you could find us. And maybe if you just put in Farmingdale State College Aviation, we have a page that's part of the college website. So all of the information is there. So, yeah, we're a very good, I'll say good deal, good economic deal for particularly for New York State residents, because our tuition is relatively low. I mean, it's about $7,000 for the year.
Okay,
and then our flight fees between schools, they're probably about the same. So we require our students to put down $18,000 a year, and basically they draw down from that. So if they're good students, they may not necessarily use all those funds. So roughly speaking, we say for a New York State resident about $25,000 or $25,000 a year in tuition. And as you may know, Mike, there's a very, very large pro-pilot shortage that's looming, particularly with the mandatory retirement here in the United States for pilots who are retired at age 65. The military is also concerned about their shortages. So our students are in a pretty good place. I think they're, as I say, a seller's market. So they have the opportunity to have a great aviation career.
Yeah. And a question I ask all my guests, finally, do you ever get sick of talking about aviation?
You know, I don't. And one of the things that we've done here since I've been here is really formalize our safety programs. We have a safety management system that we're very proud of. Our safety officer has really done a great job in building it, and we're teaching our students about risk management and hazard reporting, about all the things they need to do to keep safe. So I enjoy the opportunity to talk about the program and how we keep it safe. We had a rash of general aviation accidents not too long ago here in Long Island, 3 or 4. So I had the opportunity through the college to talk to the media about how we address that and talk about good maintenance, good pilots, means safe operations. So, to answer your question, I'm really pleased I'm able to continue my love of aviation through the college here and through my great colleagues here at Farmingdale State College.
Well, Mike, it's been an absolute joy talking to you and hearing your story, and thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.